I don't think I have my slideshow set up to go on the right monitor. Okay. All right, so what we did, just to kind of review what we started off with, right? We're going to get into more stuff, but the basics, right? We looked at code first development. So just to mention it, you can start with an existing database, and Entity Framework will be able to actually generate your POCO classes, all your model classes from the database, right? But we thought, hey, you've done databases before. Let's look at doing code first, where we define our model classes first and have the database tables created. So we'll be doing both eventually, but we're starting off focusing on code first development, right? So here is our in-class example, doctor-patient, right? Where a doctor has many patients, patient has one primary care physician. In a diagram like this, you'll see these little navigation properties shown at the bottom. That's where we created in the patient, right? We had a doctor object, a virtual doctor, right? And then in the doctor, we had an I collection of patient objects so that we could eagerly load, when we instantiate an object based on either of these classes, we could eagerly load the related data into it if we want to. Okay. So in terms of creating the classes, the next thing we did was we used our annotations of different types, right? Things like required, okay, so it would be not null in the database. String length was useful for both how it's built in the database, and that will actually also give feedback if somebody types too many characters in the user interface. They can actually get an error message validation based on that as well. Then we looked at things like regular expressions and ranges and things like that that are definitely just for validating the data entered into the website. That doesn't really affect how things are built inside the database. Right? Then we looked at that context class. That's our connection to the database itself, right? We saw that it's the safest way to get it in place because of all the extra steps that are involved now with dependency injection is to use that add data contacts little plus sign inside our dialog box for adding a controller, right? Then, of course, I talked about my personal pet peeve that a collection should be plural when you have a class of a single type, right? So we went through it a second time, basically in terms of actually adding the controller. But we noticed that it inherits from DB context, which is part of Entity Framework in core. And then we saw that we could override that event, the on-model creating. 3 useful things we saw we could do once we do that is to set a schema for all of our tables, right? That really, it's not life and death, but it helps us be able to reuse the same database essentially for different applications just by putting it in different schemas. And then we saw we could specify cascade delete options using that Fluent API, right? And the Fluent API also allowed us to add extra indexes, perhaps making them unique and things like that. Just kind of reviewing quickly what we did in class together. Then we looked at adding in a migration, right? Simple matter of going into our package manager console and saying add migration, but we did find because we have more than one DB context, we had to go the dash context option to specify the name of the context we want to create add a migration for. And then we also found that if we could go -O for output to specify where in our solution structure we would make our migrations folder. Then we got into seed data. Now, did we? Remind me. No, we didn't actually get to seeding data. So that'll be the next thing that we look at doing, right? Just to wind up this review though, okay, always a good idea to do build regularly, right? Especially after you add a new model class or change a model class. Just catches little mistakes that you might have made. Plus it updates the whole system's awareness of the new objects that you've created. Helps with IntelliSense and things like that. Okay, so before you scaffold anything like new controllers or views, always a good idea to build. And then, we'll look at further today. It's good that we have this scaffolding, right? And it does a lot for us. We saw that we could already have pages to help us insert, update, and delete records, but there's some improvement needed to them. Okay. So that's our quick review